Okay, Chair, you're live on YouTube whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks for that, Scott. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual meeting of the Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee. Can I remind all participants that the normal rules of procedure apply? For example, comments and questions need to be directed through the chair. As we're meeting virtually, proceedings may take slightly longer, so your patience is appreciated. As per our virtual meeting procedures, if questions have been received prior to the meeting, I'll call on the relevant member at the appropriate time to raise that question. If you're invited to speak, please state your name and be as specific as possible about the issue to which you're speaking. And members of the public can view this meeting via YouTube Live, but they won't be able to actively participate or comment on proceedings. As this meeting is being live streamed, can I remind all participants that their conduct should reflect this? Thank you. Okay, so I'll start with agenda item 1. Apologies for absence. We've got a full complement today, so there are none. Declarations of interest, agenda item 2. Do you have any? Ian, are you putting your hand up or are you just moving your camera?
Just
No?
moving my camera,
Okay.
Chair. Thanks.
I'll take the silence as there are none. Agenda item 3, minutes of the Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee from the 4th of February. Do anybody have any comments or queries with regards to those?
We'd move them, Chair.
Okay. Is that agreed? Silence is golden. Brilliant. So we'll move on to agenda item 4, the capital strategy. And for this, I'll hand over to the relevant office to make the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So Justin Weston, Head of Finance and Investments. So this is a new report for Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee. It's part of the budget report, Appendix 6 of the budget report that's recently been approved. So it's one of the building blocks of sort of setting the integrated revenue and capital budget strategy for the council. The reason for bringing the report to members is that we, as part of the capital strategy, we follow 2 best practice codes set out by our Accountancy Institute, SIPFA. So we've got the Prudential Code on Capital Finance, and we've got the Treasury Management Code of Practice, which we follow. So what's important to understand is that in terms of the budget process, there also needs to be a sort of an independent sort of governance process around capital strategy and around the investment strategy, the costs of that, and the ability to ask questions. So part of that can happen through the budget process, but I think it's also very useful to have members of the committee understanding a little bit more about capital strategy. It's a complex area, and you know, asking questions that will help you in terms of future budget processes. So that's the reason we haven't brought it in the past, but I think that it's you know, it's a good idea, and you know, I think it gives you, you know, sort of opportunity to see some key numbers and sort of how we manage the finances around that. So the capital strategy is it's a high level overview of capital expenditure, financing, and treasury management, and how they contribute to local public services. And paragraph 4 just sets out what the capital strategy covers. So it's the funding of the investment strategy. We use prudential indicators to demonstrate that the programme's prudent, it's affordable and sustainable as part of our medium-term financial plan. And you know, it's important to understand what those prudential indicators mean and how they work to continue to you know, manage the budget position. There's a little bit about treasury management and how we use that. So the reason that treasury management is important in terms of this is around loans and investments. So we need to take out loans and do borrowing decisions at various times on capital schemes. We also have surplus cash as a result of income coming in advance. So how we manage treasury is integrated with how we manage the the capital strategy. Each year also we have to approve an annual investment strategy as part of the budget setting. So that says what we do with surplus cash when we get it, where do we put it, how do we protect it. And then we've got something called minimum revenue provision. So this is the cost of borrowing to the revenue budget, and we've got some discretion in how we manage that. So there's a covering report that sets out all the various sort of like key amounts, key levels of debt, you know, what our position is in terms of how we're funding the strategy. But what I thought might be useful is just to look at Appendix 1. So Appendix 1 is actually what went to Council as part of the budget report. The covering report gives you some explanation, but Appendix 1 gives you a little bit more detail. So this starts off at page 8 in your agenda pack, and you know, capital expenditure is different to revenue expenditure. You know, we've talked to the committee about that previously in terms of statement of accounts and some of the training that we've delivered on that. You know, capital expenditure is essentially the money that we spend on assets, so property, IT, vehicles, where we get an ongoing benefit for more than a period of 1 year. So table 1, which is one of the prudential indicators that we use, that sets out how much we're intending to spend on capital over the sort of medium-term financial planning period. So you can see there that for 21-22, we're expecting to spend £63 million on capital. In 2021, 45 million. It outlines in the next paragraph that's at the top of page 9 what we're intending to spend that capital expenditure on. So some of the main schemes that are involved, and hopefully you're all aware of. A little bit around the governance of how schemes get into the capital programme. And you know, most of that is through a sort of coordinated approach through CMT, where we provide information on funding and on, you know, risks and economic issues around particular schemes. So there's a process that evaluates, considers the risks, looks at the financial implications, and, you know, any associated income streams. What we've got at table 2 is how that capital expenditure in table 1 is broken down. So there's a number of different ways we can finance capital. We've got external sources, so grants and contributions from other bodies. In 21-22, that's about half of the capital programme is being funded through external sources. We've then got the ability to contribute specific funding sources ourselves, either from assets that we own, and that's known as capital receipts, and you know, if we have any revenue monies that we can put into particular schemes. And then the final funding source that we have available is external debt. So that's where, as a council, we would we would borrow monies either from the government or from other financial institutions, you know, and we have the ability under the Local Government Act 2003 to do that, as long as the cost of that is affordable through our revenue budget. So table 3 talks about minimum revenue provision. So when we make a decision to spend capital, and we don't use either external funding or our own resources, and we use borrowing, there's a cost attached to that. So table 3 shows how much that is, and that's about £5 million for the 21-22 budget. What you can see from the table 3 is that that's increasing over time. So that indicates that borrowing levels within the council are increasing. So table 4 sets out something that's called the capital financing requirement, and this is quite a key element of the capital strategy. So the capital financing requirement shows our underlying need to borrow. So this is based upon all of the decisions that the council has made over time, how much of its investment plan has used borrowing. And what you can see from the numbers in table 4 is that currently we have a current need in the current financial year of £246 million, and that increases up to 261 million in 2023, and then it starts to reduce. That's directly influenced by capital schemes funded by borrowing. On table 5, that sets out the capital receipts that we're expecting to generate. That's a large funding source for the capital programme, and you can see that in 21-22 we're expecting £15 million of capital receipts to fund the programme. So that's quite a significant sum, higher than in recent years. That's a key funding strand for the council. I mentioned treasury management before. We have essentially a number of bank accounts, and we receive cash income based, it can be revenue cash, it can be capital cash, it can be going towards the investment strategy or the revenue budget. And it's only when we receive the money that we allocate it to particular areas. We tend to get the income in advance on revenue activities, so we get it before we need it. On capital activities, if we've got a borrowing need, then eventually we won't have enough money, so we need to borrow at those points. In terms of cash levels, the council at the end of January had 20.8 million of cash balances available, and the level of debt that the council had was 223.9 million. When we're considering how to balance that cash and how to make sure we have enough liquidity to pay all suppliers and all staff and meet all of the immediate needs of the council, then we can borrow to cover that. So we can borrow either short term from other local authorities or longer term from the Public Works Loan Board. All of that counts against the capital financing requirement. Some of that's longer term, some of it's short term, and we need to refinance over the period of the life of that debt. So table 6 shows you the level of debt against the capital financing requirement. So at the moment, our levels of debt are below what we need to borrow. That's called an under-borrowed position. Most councils are in a similar position, and the reason for being under-borrowed is that obviously debt costs money, as we've talked about in terms of capital financing costs. So we've got a slightly lower level of debt than we need to have. We've got some revenue budget savings as a result of that. Moving on to table 7, we have something prudential indicators that are set around what's called borrowing limits. So the borrowing limits take into account the level of debt that the council has, how much its indebtedness is in terms of its capital financing requirement, and then an assessment from officers around what flexibility or headroom we might need. So the authorised debt limit of £350 million for this year is quite a bit higher than the capital financing requirement. It's set in that way because it gives us flexibility if we want to refinance any debt, repay it and restructure debt at lower levels of interest to make savings. If there are any unexpected capital needs during the year, if we needed to borrow on a temporary basis for revenue purposes, then that's something. It's set by members, advised by officers. So we've covered the investment strategy in terms of the cash that we hold. we have a sort of a strategic goal, which is to keep cash at £15 million. That gives us enough flexibility to have sort of a couple of months where we wouldn't need to borrow. So that's useful to have. Table 9, I think this is one of the key tables to understand. So I mentioned earlier that we've got something called minimum revenue provision, £5 million. Well as paying principal back on the loans that we owe, we also have interest. Obviously, if you borrow money from any source, you need to pay interest back on that. So this table sets out the total financing costs of principal and interest based upon the level of debt that we have. So if you remember, 223.9 million of debt, and the cost of that at the moment is about £9.5 million. So as a proportion of our net revenue budget of 116 million, that's around 8%. So what you can see in this table, and what's quite an important strategic point, is that although this is stable, the level of debt is rising. So, it's important to understand why that's happening. And the sustainability paragraph just highlights a number of key considerations. So, yes, we're investing more in capital, and we're doing that more ourselves through political decisions. So we're using more borrowing. But in recent years, that borrowing has been towards economic regeneration activity, and a number of those schemes have generated an income in return. So we're managing to keep the capital financing costs of the council stable when we've still got that capital investment. So the paragraph outlines that during this year we've got around £3 million of income that's coming back in from those investments that we've made. So the likes of TAMP, Centre Square, those type of investments are generating income streams that are allowing us to manage the budget, the affordability and sustainability issues in a manageable way. So table 10 sets out the borrowing that the council expects to undertake in each of those years. All of that borrowing has been costed in terms of the financing costs that you've seen in the previous table. And obviously, when Ian's setting the budget in his advice to members, these are key considerations. What's the investment strategy? How are we funding it? What's the level of borrowing? What's the annual cost? How much income are we bringing in from those assets? And at a point in time when the budget's being set, then the prudential indicators are all relevant, sets of how we manage that. As you go through a financial year, as your capital investment plans change, then members need to be looking to see whether we breach any of those indicators. So if we breach the indicators, it means that either we're spending more on capital, we're borrowing more than the budget that's been set, or our financing cost is higher. So in the executive reports on a quarterly basis, we commentate on have any prudential indicators been breached. Normally, capital expenditure tends to decrease from when you've set the budget to during the year, because there's the sort of normal capital planning issues and schemes don't happen quite as quick as you expect. So normally we don't breach those, but that's a key indicator as to whether the financial plans of the council are continuing in the way that members have agreed, or whether they've changed. So the treasury management indicators are really around sort of how we manage the loans and investments that the council has. One of the key issues at the moment is around knowledge and skills. So the SIPFA is consulting on the Prudential Code at the moment, and the Treasury Management Code, and obviously making sure that you've got key staff involved in all of these processes, whether it's capital programming, borrowing money, loan, investing money from the council. All of those are, are really key. So obviously we make sure that that the staff involved in those processes are, competent. I've worked in local authority capital finance and treasury management for almost 25 years now. And I think those skills are really important in giving members and the organisation confidence that we understand the issues, and we know what we're doing when we undertaking capital investment or loans and borrowing to finance that. We need to set something called an investment strategy. I'm sure you can, read through that in your own time. Essentially, it's how do we protect monies that we invest with other counterparties. So we use external advisors, a company called Arling Close. We make sure that we only invest in companies with good credit ratings, and that we only invest for relatively short durations to protect the monies that are invested until we need it. So, and then finally, we set our minimum revenue provision policy. So this is how much the cost of debt is against our revenue budget, and the later parts of the appendix set out. So depending on the age of the debt, we would make provision, appropriately that's in line with the Prudential Code. We do minimum revenue provision for each capital investment scheme, and most of that relates to the age of the assets that are being created. So if we've got a 40-year life asset, then we'll charge 1/40th of the amount invested in that asset. So that's how we get back to a minimum revenue provision budget. So the report gives you the relevant information. It's quite a complex area. I think this is something that we'll need to keep coming back to with members to help to understand. Obviously, it's a key role as part of the scrutiny and governance of the council's finances for you to have this information. We're going to do some training on treasury management in the early part of the next municipal year, and we can build in some of the issues that members raised today. So it's an important element of the council's finances. Because it's complex, I think it's important to go through it in a little bit of detail. Hopefully you found that explanation useful. I'm happy, Chair, to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Justin. I'll start with Councillor Rooney because she submitted questions in advance, and then I'll take any others after that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think some of these have actually been answered, and it's my fault for not reading right to the very, very end of the report. So apologies for that. Because my first question was, should each capital impact assessment against the revenue costs? But I think I'm right in it. That was right at the very end of the report when you talked about the minimum revenue provision and setting a percentage against that.
Yeah.
So that's the wording.
Yes, that's right.
Great. Is the second question on that bit was, is capital spend dependent on the overall amounts the council has, the early income or balance at the time? So what I'm asking there is about the comparison. So would there be a limit on how much we could spend on capital based purely on the size of the authority? I think is what I'm and if I just and then let other people come in the other bits. Paragraph 14, who made the decision to set the limit?
Yeah.
And paragraph 24, can you give examples? And if I just go back to the report and I'll just check that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Looking through it as you were giving your presentation, Justin, which was really helpful. Let me get correct. Was the authorised limit for the council is currently much higher. So I think what you're saying is we're borrowing more at the moment than we have previously. And on paragraph 24, the council's undertaken some capital projects in recent years that generated revenue income stream, which I think you also talked about, didn't you? That was at 3.1 million. Because our capital investment previously had been about economic generation, whereas I think I'm right in hearing that that is not necessarily the case this time. So para 24 was, what examples can you give to explain that to me? Thank you.
Right. Okay. So I think in terms of capital spend, as I mentioned, each capital spending decision, is based upon the resources that are available to fund it. So if a capital scheme is based on, sort of external grants, say from the government, then obviously there's no net cost to us of using that funding for that scheme. Each scheme is taken on its own merits in terms of the funding that's available, and the key issue is, does the council have to borrow to fund it, and as a result of that borrowing, are there costs attached? So, the prudential indicators try and set out that by explaining how much of the programme is funded from what individual source. So that that's a really important element. So, every capital spend decision is scrutinised, and it's only when there's borrowing that there's an ongoing revenue cost. Obviously there's an opportunity cost of using some of our assets to pay for capital schemes. There's an opportunity cost of using a grant in a particular way as well. So I hope that answers that particular question. In terms of sort of affordability, then absolutely, that's that's right. That's the reason for considering all of all of these things. How can we demonstrate affordability, sustainability, and prudence? Debt is increasing. That's a consequence of the budget decision that's been taken by the council over years. Capital investment allows to create new assets, to transform existing services, to give residents a better quality of life. So it's right to recognise that debts are increasing, but we've got to look at how affordable and sustainable that is against the budget. In terms of the authorised limit I mentioned earlier, that's something that's a legal decision taken by the full council based upon the investment strategy that's put forward. It's a decision made by members, but advised by officers. So within the report, there's some explanation around the reasons as to why the authorised limit is at a particular level. It's based on the investment strategy with some headroom for some unknowns and debt refinancing if we need it. The important thing to know on on paragraph 24, is that we've got these investments. The investments are predominantly for regeneration and economic growth purposes, but if you can do that in a way where you generate income from those activities, then that's the sustainability angle of increasing debt. So what we're trying to show is that although the debt levels are increasing, some of the assets now have revenue streams. Their predominant aim is still regeneration. I think that's really a really important point to get across. But what we're trying to do here is to show that if the council was in a position where the debt was rising and the cost was rising, then in a position where resources are reducing, that's quite a difficult decision to make, because you've got to decide whether to invest in revenue services or in capital. You know, at the moment we can invest in capital, but the cost to the revenue budget is staying the same. So we're covering our costs. These are called investor save schemes. You know, and I mentioned, you know, the 3.1 million. You know, that's what we're expecting to, you know, receive. And you know, if we didn't have that £3 million, then the cost of capital financing to the council would be great. It would be you know, sort of near a 12-13 million rather than 9.5 to 10 million. So does that cover your points, Councillor Rooney?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Justin. That was really helpful, and I think it probably helps the next two questions that I had. So I'll leave that for okay, because I think we'll be covered and let somebody else have a opportunity. I'll come back later if I need to. Thank you.
Okay.
Do any other members have any questions or comments on Justin's report? It's like the world's quietest auction. Nobody's putting their hand up. Councillor Rooney, before I move it to be noted, do you want to come back in at all, or are you happy? I bet you were expecting a gap, weren't you?
I was. I think the initial questions I may have multiple and look at this again. In terms of the training that's being offered, I don't know how you're intending to deliver this, Ian, but it would be really helpful to take this in chunks, you know, maybe over 2 or 3 sessions, because I think each one of the areas is so detailed and can be quite complex, and it's another language that we have to get our heads around, and I know that would certainly help me. Thank you.
Chair, I think you're quite right there, Councillor Rooney. I think we need to do it in bite-sized chunks, and we need to deal with it in separate sections, because what's apparent to Justin and myself, and the reason why we're bringing this report now, is that I think we'd like to rebalance the level of focus between the revenue budget and the capital budget, and bring the focus on the capital budget up a little bit, and therefore the training will be a key part of that. So we won't try and do it in a superficial way. We'll give it the time it requires. So thank you for that, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Ian. Thanks for your questions, Councillor Rooney, and thank you for your report, Justin. I do think it will be positive if the training is broken down, and also perhaps if there's any queries as to how members, or suggestions as to how they would prefer to receive the training, because the circumstance we're in, it can be difficult. And some people prefer presentations, some prefer a bit more interactive, so if they can send their suggestions to Justin and Ian, and then we'll get something that fits perfectly for the committee when it comes to training on the treasury management. So therefore I will move that this report be noted. Everybody's quiet today. I'm liking this. Right, well, thank you very much, Justin, once again. And on that point, I'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the audit results report. And for this, I believe it's over to yourself, Mark Rutter from EY.
Thanks, Chair. Stephen Reid from EY here.
Stephen's jumped on.
Yeah, and I'll hand over to Mark. Chair, this is the audit results report. You'll recall that a version very similar to this was presented to a previous meeting of the Audit Committee. This has just come back for noting to the committee now that we've concluded our audit for 1920. And I'll just pass over to Mark, and he'll just highlight the changes in the report, which are relatively minor and straightforward.
Thanks, Stephen. Mark Rutter from EY. So first thing I'd just like to say before we get into the reports is actually just to confirm that we did issue our opinions on both the council and the pension funds yesterday. So I'm pleased to be able to report bringing an end to those audits to the committee today. So these reports really just update on the outstanding matters when we presented back in November. So I don't intend to run through the full reports. I'll just focus on the updates. So if I move to page 5 of our report on the council, when we reported in November, we raised that there was an ongoing discussion with management around the Centre Square finance leases. as a result of those discussions and bottoming that out, what we've agreed with management was there was an adjustment of £8.5 million made to borrowings and to the initial recognition of the assets. So that didn't change the balance of the assets at the year end. What it did do was effectively remove the in-year impairment on those assets, so that they were no longer kind of initially at a higher value and then impaired down to the year end. They ended up quite close between the initial recognition and the revaluation at the year end, which didn't change as a result of this. And management amended for that in their financial statements. Our work on pensions confirmed where we expected to be, which was the impact of the McLeod consultation from MHCLG didn't make a material difference, or wouldn't have made a material difference to the financial statements. And we've been able to complete all of our other procedures that are outstanding in the report. So there isn't anything else on that I would want to highlight. I'm happy to pause there before I move on to the pension fund if there are any questions for the council.
Do any members of the committee have any questions on this report? I can see Councillor Hubbard's hands up. I'll go to Councillor Hubbard first.
Thanks, Chair. I've got actually 5 questions in this report, so I don't know how you want to play it, but I'd like to go to page 8 or page 44, whichever numbers you wish to look at. And it's on value for money regarding children's services. Given that the budget setting for the children's services has always been way out of kilter, what assurances can you give the council will be able to deliver value for money for children's services this current year? Thanks, Chair.
Chair, I'm very happy to take that one. It's probably a question for officers, actually, in terms of how they're going to demonstrate delivering value for money rather than for us who'll come along and audit that.
Okay, do you want to jump in?
Respond to that, Chair? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, unless Stephen or Mark wish to correct me, the value for money judgment about the provision of children's services isn't about the spend against the budget. It's about the effectiveness of the expenditure. And in my understanding, it goes back to the fact that because we've had an inadequate children's services judgment, which the council accepts and which the council is working to turn around, that means that we cannot be assured that we're getting full value for the money that we are spending. It's not about the level of budget that we've set or whether there's been overspends in previous years. That's my understanding of the position. In terms of how we are assured that we'll be working towards value for money, and I certainly can't sit here today, and I'm so sure if she was here, Sue Butcher, the Director of Children's Services, wouldn't say either, that we'd be sure we'd be providing value for money in this year, because as has been said a number of times, it's a long journey to turn around the children's services department from where we were at. But the information required for how we're going to get to providing VFM and children's services is the Children's Services Improvement Plan and achieving that. And once we have achieved that, then we will be delivering VFM in that area. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that. Councillor Hubbard, do you want to go through your questions and then I'll open it up to other members?
Yeah, I'll go on to the next one if you wish, Chair, which is page 48 or page 12, whichever you want to say it is. It's basically the, it's going on back on what was already discussed about the TAMP values and the centre square. The last 2 paragraphs basically as clear as mud to me. They really don't make much sense. Could the officer in question who drew up the report actually state what they mean? Because it's basically saying they believe the council was down by £8.5 million in their valuation. But now they've had the valuation and they're quite happy to say it's more or less the same. So could there be some clarity on that, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to clarify that one for you. So if we go back to the draft statements presented for audit, what you had in those sets of accounts was asset values for TAMP and Centre Square, which were based on valuations done as at the 31st of March by the external valuer. During the year, TAMP was an asset under construction, so the value of that was effectively up to that point before the valuation was done was the costs incurred by the council, so then it was revalued. Centre Square, which is where you've had the 8.5 million movement, those were finance leases. So under the accounting for finance leases, what management did at the time was recognise both an asset and a liability kind of offsetting each other, if you like, for the initial recognition. What we picked up during the audit was that the initial calculation of that was overstated. So both the asset and the liability initially recognised during the year was too high by 8.5 million. Now, because the asset had already been revalued at the year end, and as a result there was an impairment in the draft accounts bringing that down, there wasn't a change to the valuation at the year end because that had already been revalued. So what you saw was, if you like, the impairment in the draft account, which was the difference between the amount originally recognised for the lease asset and the valuation that was done for the council at the year end, that difference changed by 8.5 million rather than the valuation at the 31st of March. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Chair, if I could go on to page 15 or 51. This is on what are our conclusions, and this is in relation to the level of debt, which Justin's already give a piece, but I would just like to ask, Ernst & Young's response is saying that the authority has sufficient liquidity, including from planned borrowing, to support management's forecast cash flows over the period to the 31st of March 2022. And given the Chancellor's statement yesterday on the problems the country has or could face if there was any interest rates increase, his projected statement was 1% equates to an additional 25 billion of debt to the country. Is this council in a good financial shape, as we've always been told, to take any increase if there's any interest rates? Thanks, Chair.
So let me pick that one up, Chair, if I can. I suppose there's probably two parts to the answer. I'll deal with the technical going concern assessment piece here, which is what the report is concerned with. And then I may pass over to Ian to deal with the future financial projections for the council. One of the areas under auditing and accounting standards that we need to focus on every year, but more so last year, given the impact of COVID-19, was to ensure that the going concern disclosures within the council's financial statements were robust. And so we worked with management to receive the required data and different data points. And one of those very important data points under auditing standards is that is a cash flow for the going concern period. Under auditing standards, that going concern period is at least 1 year from the date of signing of the financial statements. And hence the going concern period was up to the end of this month, end of 31st of March 2022, I beg your pardon. We were satisfied based on the work that we had done there around the testing of the cash flows and aligning those and ensuring that they were aligned to the other financial information that we had seen through our audit, that the liquidity was sufficient based on management's assumptions for that 12-month period. And that's very much, Councillor, what that conclusion is talking about there. That information has been disclosed within the council's financial statements in terms of the basis of preparation within the notes to the financial statements.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like me to come in there, Chair, or is that okay?
Yeah, if you wish to pick that up, Ian, if you've got anything you wish to add, that's fine.
Yeah, just to thank Stephen for his conclusion to this area. And it's always reassuring. It's one of the big positives of external audit to get that sort of external professional reassurance on our current position. I recognise the point that Councillor Hubbart's making about risks in borrowing relating to COVID, etc. And in the budget that was passed last week, you will note that we have increased the level of unallocated reserves for the year in order to try and protect us against those things. That was happening a year, and we also put in additional money into the capital financing budget. So we've considered those risks and taken account of them. If there was to be a medium to long-term trend in that direction, then that would need to be reflected in the medium-term financial plan and dealt with in future budgets. But I'm confident we're in as good a position as we can be at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Hubbard, do you want to follow up with any more questions?
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like some clarification off Mark. I don't know how far he's completed his report. Has he gone past page 22 or page 58 in this report? Or...
So page 22, yes, because I wasn't running through the full report. I was just touching on the changes, so we haven't got that far. Page 58, I believe, is in the pension fund report, which I haven't got to yet. So if there's a question on page 22, I'm happy to take that.
Well, it's up to you, Chair. Do you want the report given, or do you ask the question? Or...
No, we'll go to the pension fund one after this one. Is there any more on this report?
Yep.
Okay. Do any members have any further questions on this? Okay. I mean, there's just a couple of questions. On the page 23, it is bullet points 4 to 5, officers' remuneration. Which post was incorrectly stated, and what errors occurred in the statement of the exit packages? Is that for you, Mark?
Yeah, so in terms of the post that was omitted, I can't remember off the top of my head what the council's equivalent is, but it's the one that's defined in statute as the chief education post, effectively. I think that had just been a minor overlook, kind of in terms of capturing the individuals that legislation says have to be included in this disclosure. On the second point around the exit packages, off the top of my head, I'll be totally honest, and I'm struggling to recall the details, but I think it was just some banding issues between kind of the which bands individuals sat within the disclosure.
Okay, that's great.
I can provide more details on that if you'd like them.
Yeah, if you could follow that up with an email, that would be great. I suppose looking at that's pretty much everything I've got to cover off, unless anybody else wants to add anything. Okay, so on that basis, the committee note the contents of that report and approve it. Agree to it. Note it. Happy.
Noted.
Everybody's been quiet. That's it. Tom's smiling now. We've got through another report. On that basis, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the pension fund report. And for this, I'll hand over to, I'll say Mark, but I'll get surprised again, and Stephen will say he's going to do it.
Thank you, Chair. No, this one is definitely me, because we have Hassan Brahim as our director for this, not Stephen.
You always change on a daily basis. It's like, yeah, guess who's going to actually do it on the day? Okay, I'll hand that over to you, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah, so just before I jump into this one, I'll just add, kind of having gone through the council's one and now the pension fund one, you know, the thank you to Ian, Justin and Nick and their teams for helping us complete these audits. I think I omitted to say that in the introduction. So for the pension fund, where we were when we presented the report in November was a bit more progressed in the council, and we brought you a nearly final report. So there's actually very little change in this version from the version we previously had. The one thing I would like to highlight is in the draft we presented in November, we were expecting to include what we call an emphasis of matter paragraph in our opinion. So that wouldn't have been a qualification, but it would highlight disclosures within the accounts around uncertainty of property valuations and investments in property. Having reconsidered it further towards the end of the audit, we ultimately decided that that wasn't necessary. So our final opinion that was issued yesterday didn't include that emphasis of matter paragraph. That's the only additional point from our previous report that I would like to draw attention to.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. I'll open it up to the members for questions. Councillor Higgins, you've indicated, so I'll let you go first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mark, does that mean that that is finished. The pension fund audit is finished, because the fire authority last week were getting a bit concerned that it hadn't been passed yet.
Yes, the opinion on the pension fund was issued yesterday.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Rooney.
Very briefly, Chair. I think I should have declared an interest at the beginning of this meeting. My mistake. On receipt of the pension. Thank you.
Noted. Any further
I'd like to
members
say
or
the same,
comments?
please, Chair. Yeah. Same.
Noted.
Non-pecuniary interest.
Miss Hobson. Same.
Just the same here, Chair. Just,
Yeah.
Okay, noted. And Councillor Higgins, you've indicated that you're declaring the same interest. That's fine. Any other takers? Now it is getting like an auction. Okay, are there any further comments or questions on Mark's report? David, Councillor Coop.
Thanks, Chair. No, I'm just pleased the report has come to this. You know, it's the Teesside Pension Fund. We should be proud of it. That it's one of the few pension funds that's 100% plus funded. But we've got the committee meeting next week, and I'll be pleased and all. So thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that. Councillor Hubbard, you've indicated.
Thanks, Chair. It's in relation to page 22 or page 58. Basically, it's under the summary of adjusted differences, and it's in relation to the 0.6 million costs incurred securing the surrender of a lease to enable the sale of associated land. What does the unadjusted difference relate to, and why hasn't it been adjusted? Thank you.
So if I initially field that, and then I might hand over to Justin for the judgment around adjustment and non-adjustment, because that's for management. What that related to was basically costs to get out of an existing lease surrender costs. At the time, I think the council recognised a debtor for that amount, and our view was that it should have just been expensed instead of recognised as a debtor. In terms of the adjustment, Justin, would you like to offer your insight?
Yeah, that's fine. So the what should have happened in the accounts is that we paid for some lease surrender cost on a particular farm, and what we should have done is we should have recognised that cost as a cost in the year of the financial statements. It should have been a cost to the income and expenditure statement. The accounting treatment that we put into place, which obviously Mark's set out, which was, you know, an error on our part, was we carried forward that that cost as almost like a prepayment to match against the capital receipt when we actually received it. So the lease surrender cost was in 2019-20, whereas the capital receipt was going to be several years in the future. So the accounting treatment on that was incorrect, but given the value, 600,000, and our materiality level, which is about £9 million, the work involved in restating the financial statements and the notes to the accounts and all other associated elements, my view was that was, you know, it wasn't worth the effort for the relatively low value. So 600,000 on its own is quite a high amount, but when you consider that the council, you know, spends £400 million a year on, you know, its revenue budget, then it's quite small. So when it's below the materiality threshold, then, you know, almost we have a choice as to whether to change the accounts or whether not to. So my view was there was too much work involved in doing that. And, you know, obviously we'd look to members to say that that's our professional opinion, and for you to support that. So the accounts aren't changed for that error, but we recognise that it's a small amount in total.
Thank you for that.
Any further questions or comments from members? I've just got a couple of questions really. It's on page 17, the audit differences, summary of unadjusted differences. One particular, it says a balance of 13.9 million for which management have been unable to provide supporting evidence to justify its recognition as an asset in the fund. Is it possible to explain what that relates to?
Yes, Chair. So I think that's almost a historical balance. So when we received the draft accounts, we asked for a kind of a breakdown of individual investments to go along with that. This balance, which you can actually see separately in the accounts, I think it's called something sort of other investment balances. When we asked for a breakdown behind it, what we got was more kind of a list of transactions and, if you like, investments held by the fund. We challenged that with management, and what they came back to and said that actually this balance seems to have been built up over a number of years as kind of, a little bit each year going into almost a suspense account position, which obviously means it's not actually an asset of the pension fund. So I think there was acceptance from Nick and his team that needed to be investigated and cleared. It was comfortably below our materiality threshold, so they kind of agreed it would be unadjusted in this year, and they're looking at it during 2021, and we expect that will be gone from the 2021 statements.
Thanks for that, Mark. Are there any further questions or comments from anyone? Okay, so can we note the contents of that report? I think Teresa said noted. I saw her head going anyway, she's nodding. Brilliant, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mark. And now we'll move on to agenda item 7, the certification of claims and returns, the annual report for 1920. And I'll hand over to the appropriate officer for that.
Chair, thank you. I'll pick this one up. This is just for noting by the committee.
Yep.
And confirms the work that we've completed in the year on grant claims. There was 2 areas of grant claim or other assurance work where we completed and discharged our responsibilities. One was in relation to housing benefit subsidy claim, and the other one was in relation to teachers' pension return. It summarises the results of the work for the year. There's no material matters I feel that I need to draw to the committee's attention.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stephen. Does anybody have any comments? And Ian, you'd like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just really quickly, in terms of the housing benefit subsidy claim, I think in view of the pressure that the revenues and benefits team have been in under the current year, the performance on that is absolutely excellent, and I would like to congratulate the team on that, because there's minimal things found in that audit, and that's really, really reassuring given the position that we're in. So that was all I really wanted to say, Chair.
Thanks for that, Ian. And there's no further comments from any members of the committee, so we're happy to echo Ian's comments there. I mean, it was a nominal token amount in comparison to what they go through and handle on an annual basis, so we're happy to note that report. Brilliant, that's great. See, more people are nodding, the more I encourage you. We'll move on to agenda item 8, and this is the Redmond review. Who's going to be the most eager to take this one, Justin or Ian? The way Justin's smiling, you can tell it is.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. Yeah, happy to present this. So this is a report really for information more than anything at this stage, but also to discuss any of the key issues. It's really a monitoring position for the committee. So the Redmond review is a government commissioned review of the local audit framework and how it relates to local authority external financial reporting. And the recommendations of that review are things that may have some direct bearing on the committee, its composition going forwards, and how, sort of how those are, how the external auditors, sort of communicate with the, with the wider council and the committee going forwards.
I think we're losing Justin.
Right, it looks like I'm back.
Yeah, you're back with us
Apologies
now.
about that.
Yeah, you're
Great.
back.
Okay. So what we're looking to do really is to outline what findings the review has, conclusions it's come to, how that's relevant for Middlesbrough. We've just come to the end of an external audit and a statement of accounts process. And then, what are the things that, the key issues for the committee to consider going forward. So, I think we know from the discussions earlier that local authority accounts are complex. The review highlights that there are a number of issues with the current local audit framework, and it's looking to make some recommendations to address that. So paragraph 5 of the report outlines the key findings from the review. So 40% of audits didn't meet the statutory deadlines in 2018-19. I don't know if we've got any indication of what that is for 2019-20. Obviously we've had, the coronavirus pandemic. We've also had statutory regulations which extended the audit period as well. So it'd be interesting to compare that. So quite a lot of audits not being completed by the statutory deadline. It suggests there's a lack of coordination and regulation of audit activity across the sector. That the outcomes from the statutory accounts and external audit work are not being effectively communicated to members of the public and to stakeholders. And then we've got the sort of technical complexity element of the accounts limiting sort of public understanding and subsequent scrutiny. So I think all of those issues that members can probably recognise from some of the discussions we've had on the statement of accounts. And some of the issues. So some of the relevant points in terms of the 1920 audit from the council. Obviously, we're in March now, and we didn't meet the statutory deadline for 2019-20 for the audit of the accounts. That should have been the end of November. I think there's, obvious reasons that are set out in the report and that we've discussed around that. So, that's obviously an issue that this review is looking at. We've also had quite a significant increase in external audit fees this year, for a variety of reasons. And I think, that's, something that the review recognises, that there's an underfunding of local audit within the local authority sector. We've obviously got the timeliness of financial reporting. We've got to some audited accounts now, which obviously we'll publish on the website. But we're going to be very quickly into the year end for the 31st of March 21, and we'll be producing some accounts over the next few months for that. So in the past, we've had audited accounts available on the council's website at the end of July. So there's a timing issue involved in that. I think that, we've talked about the difficulty to understand. We have a public inspection period under statute on the accounts, and in the last 2 years we've had no questions from members of the public or other stakeholders. I think the Redmond review quotes, it says that local authority accounts are impenetrable to members of the public, and perhaps there needs to be a way to to address that. And then, I mentioned the increase in audit fees. A lot of the additional work is set by regulators, and certainly, I think that a lot of that work concentrates on high values and high liabilities in the accounts. And although those are material issues, a lot of those don't have a direct bearing on the council's financial position or medium-term financial plan. I think there's a recognition as well that this has had a significant drain on both the local authority finance team and on the external audit team in terms of meeting the requirements of the the local audit framework. So I think it's something that is a little untenable going forwards, and hopefully the review will will move that on. So there's lots of recommendations made by the review, 20 few 23 in total. So paragraph 9 just outlines the main ones. You've got the report, so that's there for your, for your information. But I guess paragraph 11 is the key issues for, for this council and for members to consider from the review. So a likely ongoing increase in audit fees due to the extra work involved. So that's, something that we're aware of through the local government finance settlement. We've been initially notionally allocated some funding for additional audit fees as a result of the Redmond review, but yet we don't know, how much that funding is. So in terms of the external auditor's role, a greater sort of involvement and presence at the council. So the need to prepare an annual full report to council on the activities undertaken by external auditors during the year, and a closer, working relationship with particularly the chief executive and the monitoring officer as well. So they're sort of key issues. As well as that, it's suggesting that a qualified independent person is appointed to the audit committee to help scrutinise the accounts. So whether that's a qualified accountant or a qualified local government accountant, it's certainly saying that there's some complex issues here, and as part of the committee's processes, although you're guided by officers, in terms of really good quality independent scrutiny, it might be helpful to have another person who actually understands the accounts in a lot of detail, sort of similar to myself and Ian. Another key recommendation, which I'm not sure of the timing of when this will come in, whether it'll be this financial year or financial year afterwards, but to produce an additional statement that gives some summary information that helps members of the public link the financial statement amounts back to actually how much the council has spent. At the moment, that process, although we try and explain it in as easy and an understandable way as possible, is quite difficult to understand. So you're used to seeing information on revenue budgets and capital programs and how much that's sort of actually spending and how much income we're getting in. It's quite difficult to track some of those amounts that you're seeing on a service delivery basis to the financial statement. So almost, an independent statement that gives better quality information to members and to members of the public as well. Also, there's a recognition that over the past probably 10 or 15 years that the accounts deadlines have been brought forward quite significantly. Part of that is around the timeliness of financial reporting, as I mentioned earlier. So the current deadlines were the 31st of May for preparation of accounts, so a 2-month preparation period, and then 2 months for the audit process. So to be able to ensure that officers can prepare the accounts, given all the technical complexities, and that the auditors can do everything in terms of their necessary work to confirm a true and fair view on the accounts. There's a consultation currently ongoing by MHCLG, which is looking to move those back, so to move the audited date back for the accounts from the 31st of July to the 30th of September, so an additional 2 months to allow for those audits to be completed. So they're the key points in paragraph 11. So one of the main issues that came out of the report was sort of a new body to independently regulate or sort of local audit activity across the sector. And that was something that was called the Office of Local Audit and Responsibility, OLAR. So that's something that initially MHCLG have decided that their view on that is that there doesn't need to be a body. Currently, there's a body called the Public Sector Audit Appointments, which is the appointing body for auditors to particular local authorities. I think MHCLG wants to see that given greater time to embed, and some of the other duties that are in other bodies at the moment perhaps to be merged into that rather than setting up a new body. So currently MHCLG are setting up a working party with, you know, sort of government officials and local authority practitioners and auditors and regulators to you know, to consider some of the other regulations and how to move those forwards. But hopefully the report gives you a good flavour of what the review is, you know, what the key conclusions and findings are. It's for members to note, and obviously as there's further developments in terms of the recommendations being made, we'll bring back reports on that in the future. So happy to take questions, Chair.
Yeah, do any members have any questions or comments on Justin's report? Councillor Rooney.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A couple of things. Didn't we used to have something called the Audit Commission that was kind of disbanded in around the 90s that did some of this work? We had a fantastic team, didn't we, attached to central government that I used to work with one of them, not in that role because I'm not an auditor. So I think bringing something back might be a positive. In terms of the qualified person to help us as a committee, I think that's quite a good move. I mean, I've got complete faith in our officers, but they're employed to do a job, and you know, and they do it very, very well. I think in terms of challenging them, then I think somebody who's helping us do that could work really well. But it really, I think I'm a bit confused as to how that would fit in. Would it be a member of this committee? Would it be somebody that would draw on part way through the year to help us look at the accounts? Would it mean a subcommittee, or is that just all to be decided? But essentially, yes, it sounds like an interesting idea and something that we could benefit from, providing we get it, you know, cleared and clarified. But thanks.
Do you want to come back in on that, Justin?
So you're absolutely right, Councillor Rooney, that it's yet to be decided. So, you know, most of these recommendations are things that are being worked through, you know, in terms of next steps for that. So, you know, I'm sure there'll be further advice as to what to do. You know, I think my own view is that I would see that as being a permanent member of the audit committee, because, you know, anybody who's got reasonable financial background can, you know, play a valuable role as a committee member. Quite how you know, how that happens and how the appointment goes and who's involved in that, you know, I think all of those things are still to be decided. But, you know, I'd absolutely agree that having somebody who can challenge officers, who knows and understands a little bit more about the issues, I think could prompt you know, a good further level of discussion that might prompt other questions from members. So it's a very positive move.
Okay, Councillor Hobson, I'll move to you and any other member as they indicate.
Thank you, Chair. Would this be a paid job, Justin, or would it be a voluntary job?
Again, I think that's to be decided. I don't think there's anything explicit around what the role will be. And you know, certainly I think, you know, we've got to wait a little bit more for you know, advice on how that role is and, you know, what local authorities go through. So, you know, I think what we've got to do is make a mental note of the issues and then come back to you once we have more guidance.
Do any other members have any questions or comments? Councillor Marston.
Thanks, Chair. This review that says possibly of extra auditors and independent regulators, is this brought about as an overarching view of councils' finances, all councils, or is it because of the behaviour of a small percentage of councils who've been working rather dubiously? Thanks, Chair.
Justin?
Yeah. My view is that this is, there's issues across, most of these issues affect, all local authorities. I don't think that there's, there are different issues and different circumstances for each local authority and for each audit. But I think, given the fact that 40% of the audits didn't meet the deadline last year, I think that shows that, it's quite widespread. And, I think that there's, a recognition that, the supply of both auditors and local authority finance staff is, difficult. And I'm sure colleagues at EY can comment on that. We've got a vacant chief accountant position currently at the council. We've tried to recruit 3 times to that post and not select, not being able to find relevant candidates. So I think this is something that's affecting all councils, not just a few road councils.
Thanks, Thanks, Chair.
Does any other members have any questions or comments? Go on, Ian. I saw your hand go up.
Thank you, Chair. Just really quickly, firstly, in relation to Councillor Rooney's point about the qualified person, I certainly would welcome that. If we could get that on the committee once we understand how it would work, then that sort of independent challenge would be welcomed by myself and Justin and the team. The only thing I wanted to say, Chair, was on the previous report, I was conspicuous by not thanking EY and Stephen and Mark and the team for their assistance, because I wanted to wait for this item, because this shows the context that they've been working in, not just last year, but in the year before that. And that applies to EY and also to Justin and the team internally. It is an extremely difficult environment to be carrying out local government accounting. And that's pre-COVID. We're not even really pointing at COVID there. The statements are complicated, the regulation is increasing, the resources are increasing to meet it. So I just want to place on the record my thanks to EY and Stephen and Mark and the team for what they've done over the last year, because it's not an easy job at the moment. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Does anybody else have any further comments or questions? Councillor Coop.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Someone said that the person needed as a committee would have as a committee some at least basic, if not more advanced knowledge of council finances, etc. So that could limit the field of who you can get. I don't know whether the thoughts are that be a financial advisor or something, or would they have to have experience in council affairs? Thank you.
Yeah. So certainly, I think it would need to be a qualified accountant, but you could get a qualified accountant doesn't necessarily need to have local government experience. I'm sure if an accountant had health experience or industry or private sector, then they'd be able to tease out some relevant issues. So perhaps having somebody who knows how local authority accounts come together might be a small advantage, but also having somebody who hasn't seen the accounts before but understands how a set of accounts are prepared might be an advantage as well. So I think you could go down both routes, to achieve that.
That's great. And are there any further comments or questions? Okay, Councillor Hubbard, you indicated.
Yeah, just to say, Chair, before you start the next item, I'm going to have to leave the meeting, unfortunately. So my apologies to everyone.
Thanks for that, Councillor Hubbard. I mean, in summary, I would like to echo Ian's thanks to EY for the work they've had to complete. But as you say, it's across the board with all auditors. I think the review's been helpful. It's highlighted issues that I think most of the committee have been aware of. Timetables not necessarily being hit, and I think as a committee we can sometimes see audit fees and feel like we're mum and dad having our pockets patted down for change. But so yeah, and that's a correlation with the increase in fees to an extent. But yeah, the work that's been carried out, it has been challenging for all officers involved and EY, and it would be good to see this improve, and it just gives the public a bit more confidence as well. I think the decision by the government not to have another regulatory body is good, because you essentially have the teachers marking the homework and then a teacher marking the teacher's homework. So it's another chain, another layer, and no doubt we'd end up paying for it somewhere along the line, as with all things that are imposed upon authorities. But yeah, thank you to EY for their efforts in the last 12 months, and Ian, again, to your team. We keep saying it, and it's yourself included. You have to juggle everything. Thanks very much for everything that's been produced and done this year. Okay, on that basis, we're noting that we've discussed it. We're all happy. We'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the internal audit and counter fraud plans for 21-22. And for this, I'll hand over to Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so this is the first of our 2 reports this afternoon. So the first one is the internal audit and counter fraud plan for 21-22. So this is at page 141 onwards. The covering report gives you some background about the plans. So paragraph 3 at page 142 onwards explains the requirement for a programme of work as per our professional standards and the Council's internal audit charter. Then moving down the covering report, paragraphs 7 and 8 explain how we've pulled the report together, the plan together. That's based on our existing knowledge, discussions we've had at directorate management teams and with senior officers. Obviously, there was a consultation with yourselves at the last meeting of this committee, and also taking into account our knowledge of emerging national risks as well. As with last year, we've developed a flexible plan. So you'll have been used to in previous years a full list of all the audits we were going to do at the start of the year, but this time we're just indicating some areas which we might cover. So the intention is for the plan to be responsive to changing risks and priorities throughout the year. And I think, as we're obviously in these uncertain times in relation to COVID, I think that'll benefit the council and our approach, I think. So the detail of the plan, we've got 2 appendices. So the first one, Appendix 1, from page 145. So this is the internal audit plan. And you'll see the potential work there under key headings, such as corporates, main financial systems, IT, individual directorates. And so as I've just said, these are all possible areas we'll look at. We won't complete all the audits in there, and it certainly isn't exhaustive either. So you'll expect to see things added as the year progresses. You'll see we've got an allocation of days against each area, and again these are indicative. So these can also sort of change as well. And we'll have ongoing conversations with Ian and Justin throughout the year just to discuss how we'll allocate the time we've got available, and obviously then we'll bring reports back to this committee on a quarterly basis. And just as an example, I was at a regeneration directorate management team today, and we were talking about the new towns fund, of course, which is obviously quite announced yesterday. And that's an area I think we'll be looking to have a look at the governance around. So I think that's an example of an emerging priority that's come up. So the total number of audit days for 21-22 is 555, which is unchanged from last year. So Appendix 2 then covers the counter fraud element of this, and I'll just hand over to my colleague Jonathan Dodsworth to take you through that.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, the counter fraud plan is on page 149 of your packs. We have a 150-day budget for next year. As you can see, we don't split things up in as much detail as the audit team do, and that's because we're not sure. We're very reactive to fraud concerns occurring within the authority, and we're not sure what work we will or won't be doing. But we've broadly split it up into proactive work, reactive work, COVID-19 response, which I can tell you a bit more about in the next report, and the National Fraud Initiative. Phil and I welcome any questions you might have about the plans, and I also welcome any views you might have about areas of fraud to work on that you might wish us to focus on. Thank
you. Okay, do any members have any comments or questions on these reports? This report? You're all easy to please today. I mean, it's one of those. It's one of those that is always emerging, and it can change throughout the year anyway. So on that basis, if nobody's got anything to want to add or any questions, if the committee approve this report. Yep, silence is golden. That's great. Well, thank you both for that report. And on that basis, I'll move on to the next agenda item, which is just for noting, and that's the actual internal audit and counter fraud progress report. Is that going to be both of you again?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So our second report. So this is our latest update on progress against this year's plan, the 2021 plan. So this is at page 151 onwards. There's an audit element to this first. So paragraph 7 at page 152 in the covering report is where that begins. Paragraph 9 talks about some of the work we've added to the plan since the last meeting of the committee. Oh, sorry, our last progress report anyway in December. Some of this work relates to COVID-19. So that's again just an example really of how we've added work in as priorities have changed. Also, this is some of the audits then that we've taken out to accommodate that, but just making the point that we'll consider that those audits for inclusion in next year's plan of work. Paragraph 10 gives you a bit of detail again about how we're continuing to work remotely, so we are doing everything, all the audits remotely still. And then paragraphs 11 and 12 just summarise some of the areas that we've prioritised this year and some of the work completed. Now, there's 3 appendices which then go into that in a bit more detail. So Appendix 1, page 157, that lists the work we've got ongoing and has been completed and the current status. Where we've given an opinion for a piece of work, it's set out there as well. So I'm expecting now this will be a final list of work that we're going to complete this year, but we are still in a position to support anything unexpected, particularly if something sort of COVID related, some grant schemes comes in. We've recently provided some support and advice on one of the discretionary COVID grant schemes as an example of that. So the team's working really hard at the moment just to get all this to draft report stage by the end of April, which is our deadline for completing this. Appendix 2, page 161, that just sets out the work that's been finalised since the last progress report in December. So it sets out the audits, the actions agreed, by priority rating. So that's from the most serious, which is priority 1, down to priority 3, and then just a summary of the work completed against each of those pieces of work. Just a couple there to draw to your attention. So debtors, that the first of the main financial systems we've completed this year. So we've completed that now with an opinion of reasonable assurance. And we also did complete an audit in relation to the offset improvement plan, governance in children's services. So I think that was quite a pleasing result on that piece of work where we provided substantial assurance. Appendix 3 at page 163. So this is the first time you'll have seen an update from us on agreed actions. So this summarises actions agreed with reports issued since Verito took over and the progress made against those. And you can see as well that's broken down into directorate level. So this report will be developed as we finalise more work, particularly towards the end of this year. And if there's any progress on any actions where we think it needs to be brought to the committee's attention, we will do that. Yeah, and I'll just pass you over to Jonathan again to talk you through the fraud element of this.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. The counter fraud content is in the main report, which is on page 153. We talk about some of the work that we've completed this year. For example, putting in a new policy framework around the reporting and investigation of fraud. Talks about COVID-19 post-assurance, which is something that's currently ongoing. The team is reviewing a large number of COVID-19 payments that have been made, and to try and detect if there is any fraud in it or not. We've taken a sample of the total number. I think there were over 2,200 payments made in the first tranche of payments during the first lockdown. The report talks about the National Fraud Initiative, which is an exercise that ran this year. We've assisted the council to meet its obligations around that exercise. And in terms of our ongoing work, we're delivering fraud awareness to many different council departments. We've already delivered it to the HR department. We've got scheduled sessions in with adult social care, parking, revenues and benefits. And we'll continue to promote an anti-fraud message within the council. Phil and I are happy to take any questions on this content.
Thanks for that, Phil. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Do any members have any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Rooney.
Thanks. Yeah, just go back to the report. Paragraph 9 on page 152, I think it was Phil was saying that a number of areas have been added to the programme and some taken out. Why did you make those decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Rooney. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the work that we've added, as a lot of it is related to the COVID support that we're providing. So I think that was the reason for adding them, because it was kind of an immediate necessity. The audits we've taken out are those that we had planned for Q4, so we hadn't actually started them yet. We'd done a bit of planning on each of them. So essentially, we just decided, in discussion with Ian and Justin, they weren't a priority at this stage. But I think all the ones that are listed there, paragraph 9, I think are audits I think we'll be looking to certainly with a view to starting at the beginning of next year, 21-22. So you're looking at sort of May onwards.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Are there any further questions or comments from members? Councillor Cope, I can see you've indicated.
The thing of the business account was friendly, right? On the business account, did you, you're going to look actually people for grants, etc. So that if someone's applied for a grant, if you have any suspicions about it, there you'd go into that sort of detail, or you're going to accept what's been done by the council itself. I just wondered what sort of areas you're going to look at over that. I'm thinking more the long term, like if people are applying for grants fraudulently, how are you going to look at that and obviously address the problem? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor. The government department responsible for issuing government grants via local authorities has mandated all local authorities do this kind of post-payment review. And to do that, we're taking a 5% sample of all of the payments, and we're going to compare them against the criteria. The council will have done a number of checks before putting these into payments. We're just going to do additional checks to make sure that that they're correct. We will report back to the council, and the council will then report back to central government. We're doing this exercise for a large number of local authorities at present. We have found some fraud, we found some error, but for the most part, we found that councils have administered these grants correctly and in a very diligent way. And that's what I expect to find at Middlesbrough, but I don't want to I don't prejudge the results of the exercise that we're currently undertaking. In terms of what happens next, if someone is identified as being fraudulent, the council has options. I think the main thing is if somebody has received a grant improperly, whether that is through fraud or error, it should be repaid. That is taxpayers' money. Is there a criminal offence associated with it? I think it depends on intent. Did the people know that they were doing something illegal, or did they just apply unknowingly and not provide the full information? So only time will tell how this exercise will work out.
That's great. Are there any further questions or comments from members of the committee? I mean, I must again replicate and echo Ian's sentiments. Thanks to Phil and Jonathan for what they've completed in the last 12 months. It's increasingly difficult because you also get thrown changes your way with the programmed work constantly evolving. It makes it even significantly difficult when everyone's remote. So again, thank you both for your reports. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Chair.
On that basis, I'd like to move across to agenda item 11, and this is the update on the polling stations and other election processes for the 6th of May 2021. And for this, I'll pass over to Sylvia Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Rathmell said, this is an update on election processes and polling stations. As you members will know, the government postponed elections in 2020 due to the pandemic, and the government have now confirmed that the May elections will go ahead as planned. So the local authority will be conducting Tees Valley Combined Authority mayoral election and the Police and Crime Commissioner elections on the 6th of May this year. So obviously with the pandemic and the changes in lockdowns, the phased release, there's a number of issues that impact on the running of elections, and the government have issued us with some guidance on what it is we should be considering, and that guidance is at Appendix 1. There's a summary of that guidance in this report really, but in addition to that guidance, all electoral registration officers and returning officers have been given additional guidance as well on administering different parts of the election. So this is just one part of the guidance that the government have issued. So I just wanted to make members aware of the number of changes that are going to be impacting upon the delivery of elections this year, and some possible impact on polling stations. One of the other pieces of guidance that the government have issued is in relation to the use of schools as polling stations. Now, Middlesbrough Council has 28 polling stations that are currently schools, and the government are trying to encourage local authorities not to use schools where they possibly can, so that we don't impact on the education of children that are already obviously being greatly disrupted throughout all of the pandemic. And therefore, the returning officer has asked us to look at how we can look to mitigate the use of using schools and whether there's alternative venues available, and if not, could we use alternatives such as mobile stations, and if all else fails, then we would still have to use those schools where possible. So obviously the delivery plan states that we shouldn't use schools, but sometimes there isn't an alternative. But we have contacted every school and asked them to confirm if they're happy for us to use their venues, and a number of venues obviously declined where possible for us not to use them. And so we have put a plan in place, and that plan is at port 4.6 in this report. But as I've stated in the report, the situation with polling stations was changing on a daily basis, and as such has changed since I've done this report as well. So I'm pleased to say, though, however, that we have sorted all of those polling stations that are in that report, apart from 2. We've confirmed that we can use them, but we still need to carry out some site visits just to check for safety measures. So all of those proposed locations have been, or new locations have been found, although not all of them are the same as what's in that list. So changes are the waiting room at Berwick Hills Primary. We were looking to use possibly use the Baptist Church. We haven't been able to contact the church, and therefore we now look to use the Neptune Centre. We have had confirmation that we can use it, but again, we need to do the site visit for that. The Cader Academy, we were looking to use the West Acklam Centre. However, the school have now confirmed that we can use the nursery. where possible, what we would like to do is trying to keep the polling stations in the same location so we don't disenfranchise any of the voters, and so that where they've always voted, the polling station should be in sight of where it was before, hopefully. The Captain Cook primary school, we're going to be looking to use Martin Library for that. But again, that's subject to a site visit because there are some concerns over the size of the venue. So the site visit will be taking place tomorrow on that venue. The Otterhill Court Community Centre, we will look to replace that with a mobile station, but it will be in the Phoenix car park at the rear of number 31. What we did when looking for alternative venues, we contacted the local councillors to see if they had any recommendations of alternative venues. Hemlington, Bewley Hill Academy, sorry, is going to be moving to the Children's Centre, and that has now been confirmed and a site visit has been undertaken, so that's fully booked. Bellamy Court Residents Association, we are looking to replace that venue due to vulnerable residents being in that building, and so we'll look to put that as a mobile station in the car park, but again that's still subject to a site visit. All of the rest of them where we've said subject to site visit have been now confirmed. Since producing this report, we've had 3 additional polling stations that we've had to source. So the Avenue Primary School, the Brunton Suite and Macmillan School. So there's been additions to sources for that. So the Avenue Primary School, we're still awaiting confirmation as to whether we can look to use St Bernadette's Primary School car park to site the mobile station, because we can't do that in the Avenue Primary School. And for the Brunton Suite, we're looking to see if we can use the land opposite the Avenue shops or the Brunton Arms car park, but again those are subject to site visits tomorrow with street scene services to make sure that a mobile station can be placed. Macmillan School have agreed for a mobile station to be sited on school grounds. So basically we've increased our number of polling mobile stations from 7 to 15, with a possibility of going up to 17 so far. So I'd just like to thank the 2 officers that have been dealing with this massive project, because it has been really difficult to try and source new venues, and I'd like to thank the schools that have really helped us out in maintaining the use of their venues as well, and the head teachers have been really supportive in allowing us to put mobile stations on their site. So it's worked out very well, but it has been really difficult in trying to do that. All of our polling stations have to be confirmed by the 10th of March, because that's when we send the data to our printers to produce the poll card. So we have to have confirmation of all of our sites by that date. And so I think we're sorted with the majority of those schools, and we're not enforcing the use of any schools at all. So we're not forcing any schools to shut, so we can meet the government's guidance on that. In relation to nominations, at paragraph 5, the government have introduced some new legislation to reduce the amount of contact that prospective candidates will have in seeking subscribers. So they've reduced the number of subscribers that that candidates need to get in order for them to put their nomination forms in. And in our area, for the Police and Crime Commissioner, elections, the number of subscribers is now 10, and for the Tees Valley Combined Authority, the number is now 8. So they're greatly reduced from previous times. Stockton Council are the lead authority that will be administering the nomination processes and will be given the advice to candidates. So we won't be dealing with that, but obviously the packs will be handed out by Stockton, but we will be providing electoral registers to Stockton to enable us to give those to prospective candidates. In relation to proxy votes and postal votes, the government have advised that local authorities will be able to contact clinically extremely vulnerable people to make them aware of the options of using a proxy vote or a postal vote. We've now obtained those lists, and Middlesbrough has 11,000 people on that list. And in order to mitigate some of the confusion that could be caused if we contact all of those people, we're trying to do a data matching exercise to see if any of those people already have a proxy or postal vote, so that we're not contacting them again unnecessarily and trying to reduce the number of letters that we have to send out, obviously. So those people that are self-isolating because of coronavirus or testing can then apply for a proxy vote. So the proxy, they can now apply for a proxy vote up to 5 p.m. on the day of polling day, rather than the 27th of April. So it has extended the period to enable more people to participate in the voting if they're subject to coronavirus. For postal voting, we are doing a media campaign to try and promote postal voting. So we've already put out something on social media, and we will be delivering a leaflet to every household at the same time as we deliver the poll cards. And that's because obviously there might be some changes to the poll cards as well. So we've put a bit of information on that leaflet about how people can apply for a postal vote. So the last date to register to vote is the 19th of April, but the last date for applying for a postal vote application is the 20th of April. So we're going to be delivering the leaflets around about the 20th of April, along with the poll cards, 22nd, sorry, not April, March. So we'll be delivering those poll cards on the 23rd of March with the flyers. So those will be going out quite soon. Account generally, when we're dealing with regional elections, Stockton are the lead authority, and the counters generally take place over at the Stockton venue in Thornaby. This year, due to the social distancing requirements, Stockton can't facilitate all of the local authorities in their venue, and therefore the counts will now be taking place in each local authority's own venue. So our count will be taking place at the Middlesbrough Sports Village. So the verification for both elections will take place on polling day. So we're expecting to finish around about 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, and then we'll start the count for both elections the next day. The Police and Crime Commissioner is the primary election, so that count will take place first, followed by the Tees Valley Combined Authority election. Obviously, we will be putting a number of measures in place in polling stations and in the count to ensure that social distancing takes place. There will be a number of safety measures for the public in polling stations, so hand sanitisers, there will be screens for staff, and the public are also being asked to wear masks as will everybody that enters the count. Will also be asked to wear masks as well. So the government have said that they will refund reasonable additional costs in relation to PPE and for hiring additional staff, such as marshals, which we plan to implement in our polling stations, and to look at cleaning teams to minimise the disruption to schools, so we can clean the polling stations on the same day that we use them, so that schools, if they did have to close, don't have to close for more than the one day. We haven't been advised yet about what those additional funds our authority will get. However, the government will fund the additional costs in relation to the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, but the Tees Valley Combined Authority mayoral election will be recharged. Any additional cost will be recharged to the Tees Valley Combined Authority itself. So there should be no additional cost to the local authority at this point in time. Obviously, we have conducted a whole range of risk assessments on all of the processes to make sure staff are safe and to make sure that the public are safe. So risk assessments are in place, but those are being reviewed on an ongoing basis to make sure that we can remain flexible and deliver a safe election in line with the phased release in lockdowns and the current public health guidance as it changes, so those will remain flexible. And that's about it from my perspective. I don't know if members had any questions on that.
Okay, I'll start. Oh, you can tell this is about politics. All the hands have gone up now. I'll start with Teresa, then we'll go to Craig, and then Councillor Coop.
Thank you, Chair. Sylvie, is it possible for you to send out to all councillors, the list of the polling stations? Because I'm already getting residents asking, where will we vote? So if we have a list of the polling stations, I think that would be very helpful. Would that be possible?
Can I answer that, Chair?
Yes, certainly, Sylvia, if you can just answer each one as they come up.
Yeah, not a problem with having a list of polling stations. There will also be methods for the public to find their polling station themselves. Obviously, once we've got all of the polling stations confirmed, there is also a polling station checker that will be available on the council's website, so people can put their postcode in or their address in and find where their polling station will be. It will also be placed on, obviously the poll cards also tell people which polling station they should be using as well. And so there is a number of things already available to the public. Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really happy to see that the council are reviewing the use of schools for this election. Schools have spent an awful lot of time this year being disrupted by the pandemic, and losing another day of a child's education should be avoidable if we can. I am concerned that we plan to use the Old Middlebeck Social Club as an alternative polling station. It's quite normal to use pubs in rural areas where there's a lack of community facilities, but it's quite unusual in towns to use pubs. Has any consideration been given for religious and cultural orthodoxy and how this might impact them?
When I've said the Old Middlebeck Club, it's no longer a pub as such. It's now a community venue, and so it's where it's known as locally. It's now used as a community venue by a member of our staff that uses it to promote community engagement and sports facilities.
Brilliant, thank you. Chair, can I ask one more? Dead quick.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Just on 4.8, Sylvia, Marshals will be placed at each station and voters and staff will be asked to wear a face covering. Will marshals be turning people away for not wearing a face covering?
No, they will provide them with one.
Okay, Councillor Cope.
Just regarding things like leafleting, etc., I understand that the rules are going to change to allow whoever to do out. Would this apply also to parish and community councils? If people start getting election leaflets put through the door, presumably by volunteers, unless it's done by Royal Mail, will this affect things like parish councils, community councils, allow them to do it? Thank you.
Only if there's an election due at this point in time. You would still, for just a general leaflet delivery, you have to still follow the public health guidance in relation to everybody else, only if it's essential at this point in time now. But obviously, as the phased release comes on, there'll be different times when you can go out and start returning back to normal. So just for delivery of leaflets, it has to be in relation to a need and in line with the guidance. The government have said that the processing for the purpose of elections and things like delivery of poll cards and seeking nominations are valid reasons to leave the house at this point in time. But obviously, as the changes to the pandemic rules change, then obviously that depends on when you're wanting to do leaflets.
Would it be possible that rules change to perhaps let us know, councillors know, community councils, because I know some of them are desperate to get some leaflets out. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, are there any further questions or comments from members? Councillor Rooney.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A couple of things. All the new venues, have they been assessed for disability? I'm expecting the answer to be yes. Disability access. The reason I'm asking about this is today is accessible voting day, and it's a promotion to encourage people who have or know somebody who has a learning difficulty to take part in voting. There's a bit of a campaign starting today on that. So it's about accessibility. It's about the information that goes out to people, and have we got some kind of check on it that it's going out in a way that can be understood by a wider group of people. Mobile stations, I think, I don't know whether anybody else thinks so, but I think they're awful. They're just not very nice buildings, and I wonder how you're going to be able to manage the distances within them, because they've only got one narrow entrance and exit. And is this something that we could look at in the future in terms of how we encourage people in Middlesbrough to vote? Because we know that some of our areas have horrendously low turnouts, and I'm expecting a very low turnout for these elections. I think everybody's kind of guessing on that one, but I'd like to see Middlesbrough actually really encourage people to go and vote and to take part in local democracy. And I just wonder if there's something that we can do around that, and whether it's this committee or whether we can request, we can't demand it, but whether we can request one of the scrutiny committees looks at it. Thanks.
Yeah, every polling station has to have a site visit, and as part of that site visit, they will assess that purely. There's a checklist that they have to go through that includes accessibility for people with disabilities and how those people would access and egress. We are aware of obviously the limitations of mobile stations, and we would want to try and avoid the use of those where at all possible. But for this year only, obviously, there's a number of schools that have said that they would need to close, which are on those lists if we were to use them, because obviously there may be a risk to children if you have large numbers of people going into those venues, or that they don't have enough room themselves to conduct all of the classes with some of the social distancing that they've been applying in their rooms. So, you know, we have to use mobile stations, and ideally I would want to use an alternative venue. But we have, of all of those venues there, we did seek alternative building venues, and that just wasn't possible. So we have, we have looked to have a building where we possibly could. Mobile stations, have problems of their own in relation to access, but our street scene services do build us ramps and access to those mobile stations as well. So we have a team in street scene who will help make sure that if there are mobile stations, that those less able-bodied can still get into the polling stations. And we also look at the width of corridors for wheelchairs and things like that as well. And if all else fails, then staff are trained that if somebody can't get into the polling station, that they will take the ballot papers out to them and the ballot box. So staff are trained to make sure that disabled voters aren't disenfranchised in any way. In relation to the promoting of voting, we have tried a number of events to try and encourage those areas of the community that are harder to reach, such as students. So we have done some events in the universities and in Middlesbrough College. We've put leaflets out on the Middlesbrough magazine, the Middlesbrough Football Club magazine, and we use the Middlesbrough News, of course. We've also in the past done the events for children coming into the council and doing some democracy counts type events as well. But if people have got ideas how we can promote that, I'm really open to that, and that is something that we consider all year round.
Okay, thanks for that, Sylvia. Just want to say thank you to you and the staff. I know it's a difficult and challenging time in ordinary times, but this time is obviously much harder. So, and I know that the team are working really hard on this. So thank you.
I think to promote voting, Sylvia, you should pick out our worst moments of council meetings and our best moments and say, do you want this or do you want that? It's the biggest incentive you've got. If your public watch that, they'll be ticking away. It'll be like X Factor. But no, I mean, do any other members have any other questions or comments? Nobody's indicating. I mean, thanks for the report, Sylvia. It is going to be a challenging time for you. Don't expect everything to run smoothly. It never does. But you always manage to get through it. So it'll be entertaining to find out how it went afterwards. And no doubt there'll be a few extra grey hairs coming through. So it is going to be difficult. But thanks for that report, and members are happy to note that. No action required. That's great. I'd like to move on to agenda item 12, which is any urgent items. There aren't any. So before closing the meeting, again, I would like to thank all officers and members for their attendance. Thank you to Councillor Rooney for the questions submitted in advance. It does make things easier for officers. And I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.